Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sharon Meyer. I'm the Integrative Functional Nutritionist at the Institute for Health and Healing. And today we're going to talk about those pesky carbs. Okay, so what are carbohydrates and what do they do? So carbs function as a source of energy for all of our cells. So when you eat carbohydrate or any carbohydrate foods, the carbs are broken down into very small components, and these components are glucose, would be one of them, and they provide the fuel for the cells in your body. Any excess carbohydrates are stored in the form of glycogen, and this is stored in the liver and in the muscle. And anything that's excess to that, guess what, is stored in the fat tissue, right? Okay. So when we think about carbs, we want to think, well, what are the good carbs? What are the bad carbs, right? So the good carbs are the carbs that work really well for our bodies. And everybody is very different. So we have to find the carbs that function well. There are 4 different types of carbohydrates. And unfortunately, they all get linked as the bad carbs. Carbohydrates fall into 4 categories. The first is vegetables. All vegetables are a carbohydrate. Second is going to be fruit. Third group is beans, legumes, peanuts, red beans, kidney beans, all of those, tofu, all of those fall into carbohydrates. And then the last thing is going to be the grains. So what are the grains? The grains are going to be wheat, rye, barley, khorasan, einkorn, spelt, kamut, farro. Actually, farro is like spelt. Triticum, emmer, semolina. All of these fall under the grains, plus amaranth, buckwheat, corn, millet, oats, quinoa, all the different types of rices, teff, sorghum. All of those are carbohydrates. Now, vegetables, of course, are going to be the most important carbohydrate that we should be consuming. And the reason why we want to eat things that like vegetables is because they're pretty much unprocessed, right? And they have a lot of fiber, they have a lot of nutrients in them. We do really very well with those, and that's the emphasis. You've probably heard me say this before, whether we choose to be vegan or vegetarian or whether we are even doing keto. Whatever tribe you choose to be in, or whether you've just decided not to give it a name, the vegetables play a huge role. Even the starchy vegetables are going to do us a lot of good. So we always go for the vegetables first. Second would be the fruit. Also, these are not very refined. Most fruits come in lots of different forms, but they come in a package, and the package is fiber, vitamins, antioxidants, phytonutrients. Vegetables come in fiber, vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and lots of those phytochemicals. The third category is going to be legumes. So legumes are going to be better for you than, say, the grains because they don't raise blood sugar as much as, say, the grains do. And really, we don't really refine those beans too much. But when it comes to the grains, that's where we get into trouble, and that's where we see a lot of refined carbohydrates. Well, yeah, so examples of refined carbohydrates would be white flour, white rice, white pasta, cereals, pastry, something like couscous. Actually, the fruit drinks are also considered to be refined. So actually, the fruit does have an issue with that. So when we're thinking about these, we think about whole unprocessed foods, right? Which is going to be all the things that we find in nature, things that have not actually been changed at all. Those are the foods that we're really going for. So when you eat a no-carb diet, when your body doesn't get enough carbohydrates from food, it turns those glycogen stores, the ones that I just said, when there's an excess amount, it gets stored in the liver and the muscle. But specifically, the body will use up that stored glycogen that's in the liver. And often when people are losing weight or they're going on a diet, that's where the body is going to go for that extra amount of glucose. So that's why when you lose weight in the first 5 or 10 days, it's because all of those glycogen molecules are also stored with a substantial amount of water. And so you're losing the water, plus you're losing some of that stored glycogen or glucose. So when we look at this, then the question gets to be, how many carbs should I eat? And that is the question most people are asking now. How many should I eat? But I want to emphasize this. We want to make sure that the carbs you consume are the carbs that work for you. Remember your uniqueness. No one on this planet has your genes. So how many carbs you eat is going to be very different to how many carbs someone else eats. And the way that we do this is we want to establish how many am I actually consuming right now. And to do that, you need to track your carbs for at least a week. Everything that goes in your mouth, you track it with an app. How many carbs did I eat this week? And that gives you an idea of where you are with this. Because the thing about eating excess foods that are so high in energy, we're going to store them as fat too. If we eat too many of them, we're not burning them up, we're going to store them as fat. So we want to establish how many carbs you consume. And then you can start to bring down that number and see where there's that really good set point. So most of the times when we're thinking about this, there are many aspects to carb reduction. So when we think about spectrum, on the spectrum where people have metabolic issues like type 2 diabetes or Alzheimer's, they tend to gravitate, I don't want to say should because you're not, should towards a low-carb food approach. And this really does prove very effective in, say, diabetes and other neurological diseases, And so that carb level should be somewhere between 60 to 90 grams a day. And then there are even individuals or those of us who are really carb intolerant. This means that the person that is extremely carb intolerant can lack certain enzymes like lactase and amylase and maltase and all of those to break down carbohydrates effectively. And they don't do well when they eat them. So the way they feel is they may get very heady, foggy, can't remember anything, impacts their memory, put on weight very quickly. You can also see high levels of triglycerides. All of these things may be linked to too many carbs. So it's information. How much should we be eating and how do we do this? So for the general public looking to slim down, a range of 100 to 150 grams of carbs is ideal. And this is really to support energy levels and overall vitality. So, as I said, quality is really important with this. So when it has high amounts of nutrients, we really want to make sure that we're eating those. They should contain both phytonutrients and fiber and be very unprocessed. A very short distance from the field to the fork. And guess what? The vegetables play that role, right? So in other words, we think very little about processing, like broccoli. Consider broccoli. It's straight from the field pretty much to your table, depending, of course, how long it took to get here. There's a quote from Mark Hyman, which I love, and it says, "If your food took a pit stop in a factory, you may want to reconsider eating it. Unless it's something you can recognize, like tomatoes in a can or an artichoke or artichokes in bottles, where there's very little processing. But the quality plays in another huge thing. The other part, too, with those grain carbohydrates, not only can they raise your blood sugar, but they also are fairly high inflammatory foods. And they also stimulate the release of certain enzymes and actually hormones, which make them very addictive. We know that if we eat a huge bowl of pasta, insulin will stimulate the release of tryptophan, which then gets converted to something like serotonin. And we feel really good after we've had that, or we had a nice big thick slice of sourdough bread. And who doesn't like a slice of sourdough bread? And then we feel pretty good after we've eaten that. But if we continue eating those, we have to continue eating more and more to get to that same place that we started off with when we got that feeling of euphoria, feeling great after we'd eaten it. And then that whole addictive cycle continues, and of course, that also stimulates the dopamine receptors, which means is that it becomes very addictive and you want more and more of that particular food. Okay. So when we think about these diets, we want to look at low carbs and their benefits. And in lots of cases, the studies have shown that they help with weight loss, but more importantly, the fat loss, reducing that body composition, the fat that surrounds the body. You know, I'm not a great fan of the scale, right? But losing the inches around the body composition improves, but low carbs, certainly the studies are pretty good with that. Studies have also shown that cholesterol levels are improved upon. Triglycerides are very, very importantly reduced. Blood sugar control. You know, when we think about insulin resistance, it's linked with almost every disease, right? You know, insulin resistance is when the receptor cell, which insulin docks onto and says to the cell, hey, we've got glucose, is no longer reading the insulin's message and no longer welcomes insulin onto that receptor. And then you end up with insulin resistance, and then that may lead to type 2 diabetes. So we always want to make sure that we're getting those functions working really well in the body, because insulin resistance is linked to with all the different diseases that we know. We also know that low-carb diets, and the research and studies shows that it improves brain function, focus, mental acuity, memory recall. It helps with energy. They help reduce inflammation. And then if you added some more fats to the diet, that will help with supporting hormone control, helps with cravings, and it helps keep you full. So what are the amounts that we should be looking at? There is no size that fits all. However, what we want to do, this is where you get to do some of the personal experimenting. Most people do best eating somewhere between 30 to 150 grams of net carbs daily. Net carbs. Remember, net carbs means you can subtract the fiber and the sugar alcohol out of your daily carb count. So if you were eating something that had 20 grams of carbohydrates and there were 15 grams of fiber, you would end up with 5 grams of net carbs, right? So 20 grams of total carbohydrates minus the 15 grams of fiber will give you 5 grams of net carb. And if there was something like erythritol in there, which was 2 grams of sugar, erythritol, you would subtract that as well. So then you would be left with 3 grams of carbohydrates or net carbs. So there are 3 different low-carb approaches within the 30 to 150 gram range. The moderately low carb, this is moderately low, and I always try and get my patients to work towards this. And that's about 100 to 150 grams of net carbs every day. And what's fascinating is that women do really well with this ratio. And you could start off with 150, move it down, move it down, move it down until you're at about 100. And just see what goes on with your body. You will know because you understand how your body works. So you're looking at energy, you're looking at how you're feeling, you're looking at what's going on with your waist size. Then there's something So then we also look at something like the full ketogenic diet, and this is always going to be under 50 grams, as low as 20. So anywhere from 20 to 30 grams would be, and for some people they go up to 50, but really a full keto will be under 20 grams. And then you can play around with anything from 30 to 150, as I say. There's also something that is known as cyclical ketogenic diet, where you have a high-fat diet, very low carbohydrates, under 50 grams for 6 days. Then you have a carb refeed on day 7, and that's where you go up to under 150 grams. And for some people, that works really well. Sometimes they need to have that day of high carbohydrates. And so for some people, we can see that sometimes the low carb, very low carbs, which is a keto low carbs, around about 20 to 30 grams, doesn't work so well. So it's all about your energy, and it's also about how you fluctuate with that. So you always need to find the thing that works the best for you. And again, the top of the list of your carbs is going to be those vegetables, right? The other part about this is we want to look at some of the carb timing. So you don't want to start high carbs or very high carbs at breakfast. You want to make sure that if you're going to eat carbs, it's at night. So if you're going to be doing the sweet potato, have that at night, because the carbs, again, will convert to serotonin, which actually helps you sleep. If you do carbs in the morning, you're going to see this peak in blood sugar and insulin through the course of the day. That's going to make you hungrier, and you're going to want to have more carbs in the course of your meal. So stick to having your carbs at night. Start off with vegetable carbs first. Try and keep away from the grain carbs, the most addictive form. Nobody tells me that they overeat on sweet potatoes, but certainly the pastas, those kind of bread things, are the things that everybody overdoes it with, cookies, etc. So start off with tracking, see how many carbs you consume in a week, and then see how you can reduce it. 100 to 150 would be ideal. And if you're way over, if you're up at 500 grams, then slowly bring it down. If you're at 500 grams, bring it down to 300, then down to 200. Watch how your body functions. Go as low as you can. If you start to feel tired, you know what to do. Up your carbs a little bit. So that's all we have for now. Have a wonderful week.